Welcome to Endurance, Noise, and Random Musings. I'm your host, Danny Noise, and it is Friday, December 2020, about 1:30 in the afternoon here in Bakersfield, California. And I wanted to start this off with a great little interview that Let's Run did with Malcolm Gladwell. And it's interesting that Malcolm, way back in 2013, said that letsrun.com was his favorite website. But even though they've been doing a podcast for a couple of years, they never did have him on. So they had him on and sat down and talked to him about various things. And he thinks of himself, Malcolm Gladwell that is, as a mediocre runner. But I'll tell you, he ran pretty good. He ran, equivalent of a 4:24 mile as a 14-year-old. So that'd be like an 8th grade freshman. And then in college, he got down to 4:13. Of course, he was running 1500s in Canada. So not bad times at all. Guess he's a big track fan. And he loves watching the 5,000 is his best event. I mean, the one he likes to watch the most. And it's definitely exciting. His favorite athlete is Ben True. And it's funny, he's talking about one story, how he was at a fairly important meeting one time at lunch. Well, not at lunch, but he had a fairly important meeting, and then he snuck out of the room to watch the Diamond League 5,000 and then got back in. So he definitely is a fan, and I definitely understand that type of stuff. Glad to hear that they're going to bring back the 5,000. It was amazing that the Diamond League was going to get rid of the 5,000 in races. And, of course, we had the world record set in a Diamond League, Monaco with Cheptegei and Gaudet. Didn't do it in a Diamond League, but so they're bringing them back, which is good. And you can hear the whole episode on Let's Run. I'll be putting that in the show notes. Interesting thing he also talked about is he's been talking about this kind of little challenge with LeBron James. And Malcolm's, a pretty little guy, and he's often challenged LeBron James to a mile race. He actually doesn't think he'd beat him because LeBron is significantly older. LeBron's 35, and Malcolm's 57. I'm 57 myself, and I definitely couldn't compete against 35-year-olds. Plus LeBron, 6'9", 250. That's what the Lakers say. I'm sure he's much bigger than that. But Malcolm's pretty convinced that if Nike allowed LeBron to run a race, that he could probably go under 5-minute mile, which is pretty impressive. I know I was coaching an athlete, Tyler, who has done really well in some 100-mile races. He actually won the SoCal Triple Crown. And he also ran like a 3:45 marathon at the end of an Ironman, and he's a big guy, but he's, I remember telling me, like, when he was playing baseball, they had to run like a 5:30 mile just to stay on the team. He was a center fielder. So it would be kind of fun to see that. Some other things that Malcolm touched on were some things about Nike. He says, at the end of the day, I'm not convinced that Nike's influence on the sport has been positive. I think it once was. I no longer think it is. I think it is destroying the sport, and they're too big for their own good and our own good. Yeah, and it definitely seems that way. And then he said he is a fan of Salazar and thinks he's a brilliant coach, and I'm not convinced that all the bad things said about him are true. And I feel that way, too. I mean, I've known of Alberto Salazar. I got to meet him. He did run here in Bakersfield. I remember telling you guys about that. I went after an American record here, and I believe he got it on a pretty hard course. And, he was a great athlete, trained really hard. He had some talent, but he definitely maximized the talent he had. And I think that's how he's been as a coach. He's always maximized the talent he's had. Has he pushed the edges? Yes. But, he's got a couple years suspension going on right now. So we shall see. And then Malcolm kind of also said, you don't build a sport with Galen Rupps. Yeah, Galen has done some phenomenal performances, obviously. But it's pretty much everything he does is on the track, and then he doesn't do a whole lot else off the track. And in today's world, that's almost as important, especially in the United States, for building our sport and making it healthy and strong. Perfect example of making a sport that's gone obviously pretty healthy and strong is I've been watching, as you guys listen to my podcast videos, I've been talking about these Spartan races a lot, and it's phenomenal that the coverage they do, they handing out prize money, but just the wall-to-wall coverage and maximizing YouTube. And, they were talking just now, I was watching this one that was in the Dallas stadium, a stadium race, which is pretty amazing. In fact, they were saying that it costs, $20-30 just to tour the stadium, so you get to run the race through the stadium. But they were talking about how they've already got prize money, and you can make a living off of doing this. And, and in track and field, and especially in the United States, you still to this day cannot make a living off it. And, I've talked before, it was in the 70s when Prefontaine and Frank Shorter and others, Bill Rogers, were trying to make it a professional sport. And, that was 50 years ago now, and it's still really, maybe a handful of athletes in the United States are making six figures, 100,000 or more, but most athletes have to have other jobs, and work and train around their work. And that goes with a lot of the Olympics. And, there was a great documentary with Michael Phelps kind of narrating, hosting it on HBO, talking about the stresses. I mean, of course, Michael's made money, but just how difficult these sports are and how much time and effort they put into them, and yet get so little reward out of them. So it's definitely something that I wish would change. But, we live in a country that's obsessed with team sports more than individual sports. And you see that, like I'm right now watching, I've been slowly watching it because I got 7 hours of coverage, this Daytona triathlon. It's at the Daytona Speedway. It's a 2.5 mile thing. It was like a 2K swim, an 80K bike, and a 20K run. And they're giving out some prize money and stuff, but triathlon's been around for a long time. But you watch it and you go, wow, where are the Americans? There's all these great British runners and British triathletes, and English and a lot of the other countries, and there's not a lot of Americans out there doing it, which is weird because I've just always thought of triathlon as an American sport. And then you think, like, wow, being a triathlete in England or Canada, it's got to be rough because of the weather and whatnot, but it seems to be as it is what it is. Speaking of athletes in the United States who have at least made some kind of a career out of their running and their passion for running is Jim Walmsley, of course. He has people that are almost as passionate about him as Kilian Jordan. In fact, you ever speak poorly of Walmsley on the internet, you'll hear it just like I've heard from fans of Kilian Jordan. But, Walmsley, he's crash and burn a lot of times. I think one reason people like William Walmsley is because he's kind of like Prefontaine. He says he's going to do something, goes out, blows up, and, people seem to love it. It took him 3 tries to finally get Western States down, and, he's gone for some other kinds of records and blown up and failed. But, he's a great athlete, don't get me wrong. But anyways, I guess he was being interviewed, and he said that marathon training is the most difficult anything from 13 to 100-mile training. That sells it, right? I'll take his word for it, says Bromke. And Walmsley responded to it. If you train like a psychopath, it's a must to love that specific type of training you're doing. Not everyone is motivated equally for the marathon. It's part of why different people succeed at the mile or marathon or Western States or 24 hours on the track. The drive is mandatory. And Walmsley definitely has that drive. I know, like, for Hard Rock, he's out there living in a tent for months on end, training out there in the Colorado mountains. And he obviously seems to really enjoy and love that. He did run in the Olympic trials this past year, and it was just crazy how all these trail people were so obsessed thinking he's going to make the team. And I'm just like, no, there's just no way he's going to make the team. Not against, people who do this as a profession and train specifically for the marathon and have that as their main passion. Granted, as I'm going to talk a little bit later on, American marathoning isn't very tough or very good, especially on the men's side. Talking about Western States, of course, with Walmsley there, it was kind of interesting that this is an article reposted. It's a pretty good article in terms of history and stuff by Outside Magazine. But it says, at night, after running for 22 hours, you hear things rustling in thickets. You have flashlight, but the shadows are playing tricks. And I was like, well, this is an article about Western States. And, even though there's only a couple hundred people in Western States because they're limited by the rules of the National Forest Service, basically what happened was you can't have competitions through national parks anymore. And so that's why, like, Badwater doesn't go from Badwater to top of Whitney. You can't race the last 11 miles. Western States goes through a few parts that are like that. And so they basically are limited to the amount of runners they had when Western States got started. So you can only have about 300 people on the course. That's why, in my opinion, Western States isn't that competitive. I've said it many times. But, the top 10 each year get invited back. And then you only have maybe, a dozen people qualifying in races to get in, and everybody else is getting in the lottery. But it was kind of interesting that this article calls Western States the toughest race around, and it certainly isn't. I didn't think that before I ever went up there. And then I've crewed and paced up there twice in 2017. And, the first, 30 miles is kind of a traditional trail race. And, miles 30 to 50 get kind of warm going down those canyons. But a lot of the race is on kind of almost fire roads, and it's not high altitude. It's not very difficult. It is a downhill race, so if you don't have some wheels, you're definitely going to have much more difficulty there. Leadville's far harder, and the main reason Leadville, because Leadville's the highest city in America, 10,000 feet, and you've got to do a lot of climbing up there, and it's also a track meet. The first 40, 50 miles, you got to do sub 24-hour pace, even though the finishing pace is 30s. So you got to do like 1440 pace just to make the cutoffs. To finish, you only got to do 18s. So unless you can run pretty quickly, you cannot hike Leadville. And then, of course, you've got Hard Rock. It's really difficult. You've got Angel's Crest down the street from me, down in Los Angeles. That's a very difficult race. San Diego's 100. But then again, all 100s are hard. Even like something people think of like Javelina isn't that bad. But you know what? 100 miles is 100 miles. Speaking of racing, this is the weekend for American marathoners. With COVID, all the big races have been canceled. We didn't have Boston. We didn't have Chicago. Very few Americans traveled abroad to run in any races, even though there was some phenomenal racing in London, Valencia, and World's Half Marathon. But we didn't leave. But even saying all that, women's marathon in the United States has never been as deep as it is right now. We had 450 women running at the Olympic trials back in February, which, my gosh, seems like such a long, long time. And right now, 10 of the top 14 athletes in our all-time list are active. Of those 10, 9 have set personal bests within the last 4 years. And so this list could grow bigger this weekend at the Marathon Project, December 20th, Chandler, Arizona. And I've been to Arizona, as you guys know, many times running across the years. So the weather should be ideal during the day for a race as such. It's going to be cool, it's going to be dry, and they're on a fast course. It's a 4.3-mile loop. And, of course, you've got Sarah Hall running 2:22, number 6 all time. And she just ran, London and ran a PB there. And it was a cold, rainy, miserable day. And she, was, running by herself most of the time. And then she had that phenomenal kick and caught the person at the end there. Kellen Taylor, she's got 2:24. She's number 9 all time. And, of course, she ran that at Grandma's Race. And she's going pretty good, and she's been running well. It's interesting. She was on that Spartan Games, and she did not do well at all. It kind of shows you how marathoners can do one thing. Her and Michael Wardian didn't do well. And it was interesting. They had like this 6-hour race on a 5-mile loop, and Kellen, she's definitely not a trail runner either. She was bitching and complaining so much about that. Another lady that I think will do really well this weekend is Stephanie Bruce, 2:27, and she just ran a 31:24 at the 10K, the track meet the other day, a couple weekends ago. And at the Olympic trials, she ran 2:29, and that was not an easy course. And then Kira D'Amato got a PB at 2:34, which she ran at the trials, but she just recently did run an American record for 10 miles. So we should see how those ladies do. There's going to be a couple different pace groups. They're going to have definitely a pacers there, and the conditions are supposed to be in the 40s, which will be good. They're going to have a pace group running the first half in 69:40 under American record pace, which is 2:19:36 by Dina Castor. But so far, Sarah Hall seems to be the only ones committing to that. Then there's a pace group 2:23. Only 7 Americans have beaten that. And then there'll be pace groups for 2:26 and 2:29:30. 2:29:30 is the Olympic standard for women. Of course, our Olympic team has been already picked, but it should be good to see women getting on here. And as they were saying in other articles, it says, that a lot of these women have shoe contracts where they've got to race, they've got to hit, if they hit time bonuses, they get more money and stuff like that. And this event has been put on by Hoka Nas elite coach, the Rata Flagstaff, Ben Rosario. And so it should definitely be happening. Pretty cool. It's going to be happening. The race is Sunday, December 20th. You can watch on USATF TV. Need a subscription. And then there's going to be a replay on NBC Sports Network. So hopefully I'll be able to watch it on that. They're asking the question on Let's Run, which I'll put a link in here. Will Sarah be able to get the record? You know what? She might be able to do it. It's been phenomenal. She's just been crushing. That time she ran in London was pretty impressive. So she seems to race well and race a lot. And so I'd love to see her really go for it. I don't think she'll be having too many people joining her. She's had kind of hit and miss. She went 2:22 in Berlin, and she had 2:22, just 2:22:01 in London just in October. But she dropped out of New York in the Olympic trials. Her husband says she's in great shape, and it would be awesome to see her going for it. It has been 11 weeks since she ran that last race. Other ladies, of course, are, like I said, Taylor and Bruce, and they've been training well. Their coach is putting on this race, so they should do well. Taylor ran 31:15 for 10K, and Bruce ran 31:24, which were Olympic standards for the 10K. And they're not tapered for this at all. I mean, they weren't training specifically for that 10,000. So those are pretty good performances. So it shall be very interesting to see what's going on with that. The men's race will be of interest because, again, they haven't been racing. Very few American men have raced at all this year. And it seems like that's not a bad thing. I often say that people race too much and don't train enough. So it should be interesting with the Americans. Interesting with American men. When I first started running late 70s and 80s, American men were pretty good. You know, Frank Schroeder, Bill Rogers, and Alberto Salazar. And we were winning races, Dick Beardsley, and people. And like I one time looked at the top 10 list, which they haven't updated very much on U.S. track and field. But back in like 2011, I looked at it. And it's like half the best times were happening in the 80s. Guys running under 2:11. In fact, you see times where guys you don't even know, and you look at the list and you go, who's that? You never even know who they are. It's like a mailman who happened to live in the Boston area and trained with Bill Rogers. Somebody who lived in Florida and trained with Frank Schroeder would run 2:10, 2:11, which is, the 5-minute mile pace. And then they just disappeared. Where, today, if you take out Meb Kefletsky and Ryan Hall, actually, because they've run it under numerous times, it ends up being like 70% of the best times ever were from the 80s. So who knows why American marathoning not been doing well? Kind of like I was saying about triathlon. There's not as big an importance on it. There's not where the money is. I'm not really sure where all the endurance guys are. They're not doing triathlons. You watch mountain biking. We're not very good in much of the endurance stuff. So it says in the annuals of U.S. distance running, a total of 21 men have broken 2:10 in the marathon, doing so a combined 56 times. Wow. I think they were talking on Let's Run about Japan. They've had over like 120 men break 2:10 in the marathon. And I think our population, we were so much bigger than Japan. So it's pretty impressive of Japan running, but American men, we just don't seem to run very well. It says only 6 races in history have had more than one American break 2:10. You had the 2012 Olympic trials where you had 3 of them. And then you had 3 in the 1983 trials. And then in 1982, you had 2 for Boston. That 83 was also Boston. Boston seems to bring out most of the best ones, of course, because Boston doesn't really count because it is a downhill kind of for fast race. So with all these major races gone, who knows how the Americans will do. Hoka Coach put on this race with Josh Cox, who was a pretty good American marathoner and used to own the 50K American records. They're putting it on in this little 1880s frontier town in Chandler. So it's a closed-looped course, and we're expecting big things from them. Excuse me. And so if you go down here, why should we see some fast stuff? One, big financial incentive. Most contracts are protected by NDAs, but there are some benchmarks to hit. If you're a male and you get under 2:10, you should definitely get a good payday, good conditions. The Olympic trials was a tough hilly course, and then there was pretty brutal wind. And, it says that Coach Rosario from Hoka says that, at Atlanta, there was 12-man runner, 2:13 in Atlanta, 7 of whom are racing on Saturday, and they definitely think this course is much, much faster. It was interesting that they picked the Atlanta course. They wanted to simulate the Tokyo Olympics course. And I guess the original course was going to be in Sapporo, Japan, which was supposed to be a hillier area. And then, of course, they moved and they changed. The race was going to be, I think it was actually going to be in Tokyo, and then they moved it. One of the ways, I can't remember how it was. But anyways, they ended up now, the Olympic course is going to be on a super fast course. So here we're going to send strength runners to a speedster course. So it doesn't really make sense, but that is what it is. And, of course, like I said, this race is geared for speed. They're going to have some really good pacers for the 209, some pretty talented guys. And then, of course, as always, the shoes, everybody will be wearing them. And so you've got basically this race, if they're hoping to, it's interesting, they're talking about this, that they're going to have some prize money, $5,000 for first, $2,000 for second, $1,000 for third. Rosario thinks the total event expenses is $150,000. And they talk about that as being a lot, but when you get right down to it, you're thinking, wow, we really need to do what, not do like they did it, but luckily Valencia, who's been putting on those great halves and fulls, a billionaire, decided to start putting on races, and so he doesn't, $150,000 means nothing to him. It's interesting that the athletes actually have to pay for this race, $150 entry fee. Of course, there's only 100 athletes in it, so that's only $15,000. But Brooks Shoe Company has been putting up some money, so kind of tells you all you need to know about American marathoning. It's only $150,000 to put on this race, and there's not a whole lot of prize money going out, but we shall see. So there's with 15 men who have run under 212 and a dozen more who would be hoping to do the same. It's tough to pick a clear favorite. You got Scott Fauble, Jared Ward, Shadrach Biwat. They've done well in major races, and then excuse me there. Sorry about that. For some reason, even in December, our air quality is just terrible. I mean, you can kind of hear it in my voice. So continuing on with it, Fauble is the only one who's actually broken 210 in a marathon. So he's kind of the favorite, I guess, going into this race. And then there's some other guys, but he didn't do well at the trials. He ran 12th, but it was his first bad marathon. But 212 wasn't too bad. And then you've got the other guys. Haven't really heard too much of. I think the person that I'm really looking forward to, of course, I'm counting him as one of my hometown favorites, even though Fresno Clovis is 2 hours up the road. But I followed this young man's career when he was in high school. He was running when I was coaching high school, and that's C.J. Alberson from Clovis. He just recently did a world's best in the 50K. On the track and treadmill. In fact, he ran on the Buchanan track. And recently, he ran a 2:09 for a marathon on a treadmill. So he's really fit. At the Olympic trials, he did really well, which I thought he would. He ran 2:11:49 for 7th. And he is definitely shooting for that sub 2:10. So he's kind of my choice for it. So unlike the women's race, the men's race is kind of all over the place. You've got Jared Ward, who's run 2:09:25, Shadrach Biwat 2:12, and then there's just a whole bunch of other guys, so we shall see what's going on with that. So that is endurance news and random musings, and as always, stay healthy, be boring, not epic.